I've always believed in earning my peace, the kind that comes after a long, honest day of work, when your back aches, but your heart feels just a little stronger. My name is Nina, and I work as a cleaner. Not glamorous, not celebrated, but it's honest, and I take pride in it. Most people don't notice the cleaners. We come in early or after hours, slip through the quiet spaces of other people's lives, wipe down their coffee rings, and empty their forgotten worries into trash bins. But every now and then, someone notices, and not always in the kindest way. That was exactly what happened the day I ran into Julia, my sister-in-law. To be clear, Julia and I have never been close. She married my older brother Thomas, and from the start, she made it clear she didn't think much of me. Julia works in corporate, polished heels, power suits, lipstick that never smudges. She talks fast, walks faster, and seems to measure people's worth by how many degrees or awards they have hanging on their walls. I have none of those. I barely graduated high school. Not because I was lazy, but because life happened. My mom got sick. My dad disappeared, and I had to work, first at a cafe, then babysitting, eventually cleaning houses and offices to make ends meet. I never complained. I couldn't afford to. Julia never asked about any of that. What she did do, quite frequently, was make digs. Subtle ones, cruel ones. Like the time she smirked at a family barbecue and said, "Nina, it's impressive how you keep going without a real job." Or the birthday dinner, where she told Thomas, loud enough for me to hear, we should sign Nina up for a certificate course, maybe something short and simple. I smiled through it. I always smiled, because if I didn't, I might have cried. And I hate crying in front of people like Julia. But nothing compared to that one morning, the day she said the thing I still hear sometimes when I'm trying to fall asleep. It was early, around 6:45 a.m., and I was cleaning the lobby of the office tower downtown, the big one with the glass walls and marble floors. I'd just finished wiping down the elevator buttons and was kneeling to scrub a coffee stain near the entrance when the doors opened. I didn't look up at first, but I recognized the voice before I saw her. Oh, be careful not to slip. I looked up. Julia, dressed in a crisp navy pantsuit, heels clicking against the marble. Her hair pulled back in a sharp bun. She looked down at me like I was something sticky on the floor. "Oh," she added with a smirk, "it's you." I stood slowly, wiping my hands on my apron. "Morning, Julia." She tilted her head. "Didn't know you worked in this building." "I do," I said simply. She laughed, sharp, short, empty of warmth. Wow. You really stuck with this whole cleaning thing, huh?" I didn't answer. What was there to say? She leaned in, her voice low and cutting. "You know, Nina, it's kind of sad. You're what, 32? Still scrubbing floors? No degree, no future? Just mop and bucket. Doesn't it embarrass you?" My mouth went dry. My hands clenched around the rag I hadn't realized I was still holding. She waited, clearly pleased with herself. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, to tell her that I paid my rent on time, that I helped my neighbor's kid with homework, that I'd kept our mother out of debt when Thomas bailed on her medical bills. But all I said was, I should get back to work. She smiled, victorious. "Right," she said, breezing past me. "Don't forget the corners." And just like that, she was gone. I cleaned the rest of the lobby in silence, tears stinging my eyes but never falling. I knew she wasn't worth my anger. I knew her words came from her own insecurity, her need to feel above others. But it didn't make them hurt less. That night, I sat in my small apartment with a cup of instant noodles and stared at the wall. I didn't have much. A secondhand couch, a chipped coffee table, a box TV. But it was mine. I'd earned every bit of it. And still, part of me felt small. That's when I opened the drawer by the sofa and pulled out the one thing I hadn't touched in years, my sketchbook. I used to draw all the time, before life got complicated, before bills and hospital visits and broken promises. Drawing was the one thing that made me feel like I had a voice. I flipped through the pages, fingers brushing faded pencil lines, charcoal shadows, inked faces I didn't remember sketching. At the back, there was one drawing I had started but never finished. A woman standing on a balcony, head tilted to the stars, a city behind her, a small suitcase at her feet. That woman felt like me, waiting for something. Maybe it was time I stopped waiting. The morning after I opened that sketchbook, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, a flicker of purpose. It wasn't loud. It wasn't earth-shaking. Just a quiet nudge, like the whisper of a breeze against your back when you're standing still too long. I tucked the sketchbook into my backpack, next to my gloves and disinfectant spray. Maybe I'd draw on my lunch break, I told myself. Maybe not, but it felt right, carrying it with me. When I arrived at this office building, everything was the same. The glossy floors, the soft hum of air vents, the early risers with coffee in hand. I started my routine, dusting ledges, cleaning glass doors, emptying trash bins. I worked in silence, lost in thought, until I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me, are you the cleaner assigned to the 12th floor?" I turned around. A man stood there, mid-40s, well-dressed but not flashy. Warm eyes, calm presence. He wasn't someone I recognized, but there was something kind about him. "Yes," I said, brushing hair from my face. "That's me." He smiled. "I wanted to thank you. The conference room has never looked better. I came in early for a client meeting, and it was spotless." I blinked. "Oh, thank you. That's kind of you to say." He extended his hand. "I'm Mark. I run one of the companies on that floor. We don't always get to meet the people who make our days run smoothly." I hesitated for a second, then shook his hand. "I'm Nina." "Well, Nina, you're appreciated," he said. "Let me know if anyone gives you trouble up there." He turned and walked away. I stood there stunned, not because of the compliment, but because it was the first time someone had seen me, really seen me, not as a cleaner, but as a person. It made my chest ache in the best way. That afternoon, I did take a break. I sat in the small supply closet, flipped open my sketchbook, and started to draw. Not people, not buildings, just lines, movement, light, shadows, everything I had been holding in since the day Julia mocked me. It felt good. So I did it again the next day, and the next. Within a week, I had filled half the sketchbook. I even stayed after my shift once or twice, sneaking into the vacant lounge on the 12th floor, curling up with a pencil and letting the world melt away. One of those days, as I was packing up to leave, Mark walked in. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said, spotting the sketchbook. "You draw?" I blushed. "Just for myself." He stepped closer. "May I see?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to say no, but something about his tone, respectful, curious, made me nod. He flipped through the pages slowly, his expression unreadable. When he closed the book, he looked at me and said, "These are incredible. Have you ever considered doing something with this?" I laughed. "Like what? I don't even have a degree. I just clean." He shook his head. "You create. That's what matters." I looked away. People like Julia would disagree. He tilted his head. "Julia?" "My sister-in-law," I said, unable to hide the bitterness. "She works here, somewhere on the 12th floor. You probably know her." He blinked. "Julia Montgomery?" I nodded slowly. His expression shifted. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet flicker, like someone remembering something unpleasant. "I do know her," he said carefully. "Our companies share meeting space." I didn't ask more. I didn't have to. A few days later, something strange happened. When I arrived to clean the 12th floor, one of the glass conference rooms was still in use. Through the window, I saw Julia, standing with her arms crossed, arguing with someone. She looked tense, angry, defensive. And on the other side of the table, Mark. They weren't shouting, but the tension was thick. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but as I passed by, I heard him say, "Maybe if you treated people with respect, things wouldn't keep falling apart." Julia scoffed. "You're taking her side now?" Her voice dropped too low for me to hear the rest. I kept walking. Later, I found a sticky note on the supply closet door. "Your work doesn't go unnoticed. Neither does your courage. M." I stared at it for a long time, then folded it and placed it inside my sketchbook. At the next family dinner, Julia was cold as usual. But something was different. She didn't say a word to me. Not an insult, not a dig, nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels like retreat. I smiled to myself. Because for once, I didn't feel smaller. I felt stronger. About a month after I met Mark, something happened that would change everything. It started off like any other day, cleaning quietly, keeping to myself. I had just finished wiping down the lounge area on the 12th floor and was on my way to collect trash bags when I heard raised voices coming from the open meeting room. I paused. It was Julia, again. But this time her voice wasn't smooth or sharp, it was panicked. "I told you I submitted the final report," she said. "Why would I lie about that?" Another voice answered. "Because your assistant says you left it incomplete and refused feedback." "The client backed out, Julia. We're down 30 grand. 35 con. Mark stepped in. "And we all saw how you handled the team. Disrespect, blame shifting, and personal insults. That ends now." "I've given everything to this company," she snapped. "Meanwhile, you let some nobody with a mop walk around like she's part of the team." My heart skipped. I was still just outside the room. The door wasn't shut, and her words were loud. Too loud. "I've seen the way you talk to that cleaner," she said. "Nina, or whatever her name is. Don't think I don't notice." A moment of stunned silence, and then, to my horror, Mark turned toward the doorway. "Nina," he called out gently, "would you come in here a second?" I froze. My first instinct was to run, to disappear, but something inside me said no, not this time. I stepped into the room slowly, gripping the handle of my cart like a lifeline. Everyone looked at me. Julia, flushed and fuming, Mark, calm but firm, 2 others from the office, awkward and clearly uncomfortable. I gave them a small nod. "Yes?" Mark turned to the others. "This is Nina, the person Julia is referring to." He turned to me. "I apologize for pulling you in like this, but I think it's time people understand something." He gestured toward the table. "This building runs because of people like Nina, and what Julia said, what she's been saying for months, is unacceptable." Julia rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, she's just a cleaner. You're seriously making her a victim now?" I opened my mouth. "I didn't plan to. I just did." "I never asked to be a victim," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I come here every day. I work hard. I don't bother anyone. And yet you've gone out of your way to make sure I feel invisible." The room was dead silent. I looked directly at Julia. "I'm not ashamed of what I do, but you should be ashamed of how you treat people." Mark turned to the others. "I think we all know who's been more professional here." Julia scoffed. "You're all insane." She grabbed her bag, shoved her laptop inside, and stormed out, heels clacking against the tile like gunfire. No one followed her. After that meeting, everything changed. I became something of an office legend. People I'd never met stopped to say hello. A few even left thank you notes near the janitor closet. One woman gave me a handmade bracelet. Another offered to buy me lunch. It was overwhelming. I wasn't used to being seen. But slowly I started to believe I deserved it. One afternoon, Mark found me sketching in the break room. "I talked to someone I know," he said casually. "A friend who runs a community art gallery. They're doing a showcase on invisible beauty, art that reflects the quiet work behind the scenes. I showed him your sketchbook." I stared at him. "You what?" He smiled, and he loved it. "He wants to feature your drawings in the exhibit." I laughed in disbelief. "I draw for stress relief, not for walls." "Then let others see the beauty in your stress," he said. I didn't answer right away. That night, I looked through my sketchbook again. The woman on the balcony. The children I once babysat. A hallway mop glowing like a sword under a single bulb. Maybe there was something worth showing. A week later, the gallery opened its doors. My sketches were framed, labeled, lit by soft lamps. People stood in front of them and stared for minutes, whispering to each other. Some smiled, some looked moved. One woman cried. Mark stood beside me, hands in his pockets, watching. "You belong here," he said. I didn't answer, but I felt it. Deep in my bones, I belonged. Not just in galleries, in rooms, in conversations, in life. 2 weeks after the gallery opening, I received a message from Thomas, my brother. "Family dinner this Sunday, Julia's birthday. Please come." I stared at it for a while. After everything she'd said, everything she'd done, the thought of sitting across from Julia at a dinner table made my stomach twist. Still, part of me wanted to go. Not for her, for myself. Because I was no longer the Nina who kept her head down and swallowed insults. I had changed, quietly, steadily, and completely. So I replied, "I'll be there." The restaurant was one of those fancy places Julia loved. Candlelight, soft jazz, menus with no prices. I arrived 5 minutes early, wearing a simple blue dress and the silver music note charm I'd once received from someone who believed in me before I believed in myself. When I walked in, I saw Thomas first. He waved awkwardly, guilt written all over his face. Julia sat beside him, surrounded by a few friends sipping wine. She spotted me and froze. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't say anything. I took my seat. The table fell into an awkward rhythm. Polite conversations, forced smiles. I said little. I didn't need to speak much. My presence said enough. Halfway through the meal, one of Julia's friends turned to me. "I heard about your art show," she said brightly. "You're incredibly talented." I blinked. "Thank you, that means a lot." Another guest chimed in. "Isn't that the one that made the paper? Invisible Beauty, right? My daughter went. She loved the mop drawing." I smiled. "That was mine." Julia stiffened. "You're an artist now?" she asked, her tone icy. I met her eyes, calm, steady. "I always have been. I just stopped hiding it." She rolled her eyes. "Well, some people have to work hard to get where they are." "I know," I said softly. "I've worked hard my whole life, not that you ever noticed." The table fell silent. Thomas looked down. I picked up my glass and raised it slightly. "To those who work behind the scenes," I said, "who make the world a little cleaner, a little kinder, and never ask for applause." A few people raised their glasses with me. Julia didn't, but for the first time she didn't talk back. After dinner I stepped outside for air. The city lights flickered above, soft and golden. Julia followed me. She stood beside me but didn't say anything at first, just lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. "I didn't expect you to show up," she said. I shrugged. "I didn't come for you." She flinched slightly. "I guess I deserve that." We stood in silence. Then she said something I never thought I'd hear. "You made me look bad." I turned to her. "You made yourself look bad." She nodded, eyes fixed on the sidewalk. "Mark told me everything," she said. "The art show, the letters, the meetings." I waited. "I used to think you were beneath me," she said. "But you're stronger than I am. You've always been." The words didn't feel like an apology, but they didn't feel like an attack either. "Why did you hate me so much?" I asked quietly. She took a long drag of her cigarette, then exhaled. "Because you reminded me of who I was before I built this facade, and I hated that version of me, the one who was scared, soft, uncertain." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. She tossed the cigarette, crushed it with her heel, and walked back inside. I stayed under the stars a little longer. That night, back at home, I took off the necklace and set it beside my sketchbook. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't ashamed. And I wasn't small. I was Nina, a cleaner, an artist, a woman who had lived through silence and come out singing. And I knew now, with everything in me, that I never needed Julia's approval. I had my own. And that was more than enough.